An interesting one for several reasons, not least of which, and again, we got everybody on this morning. Thank you, everybody. Well, almost everybody's on. A lot of people on, but we'll also stream right now. Um, but this story, which I kind of like to say is a simple story, is really not a simple story. Yeah, I'm putting it up. Thanks. Is actually some people would say we're not really sure that the story really happened in the sense that this might have some, there might be some historical uh, facts here, right? There might be some parts of this story um, that are true, but there's also a possibility that at least the story as we have it is kind of a more of um, a fable, and it's a story that's meant to teach us a lesson and not one that is necessarily meant to be taken literally. There's no mention of God um, in Song of Songs, and there was no mention of Song of Songs
How
in.
old did you think the book is? When was it written or where?
Oh, I haven't gotten to that part yet.
Oh, okay, okay.
That's okay. And there's no mention of God in the book of Esther. In this book, there is, though it's not really from the standpoint of God does something in this story, but God is invoked in a actually very powerful way. But it is not it is not an act of God, if you will. It's not a miracle. This story all takes place within kind of the setting of farms and people's homes. It's not a story until we get to the very end of bigger political issues. I mean, Esther obviously takes place all pretty much in the court of Ahasuerus, but that's got a huge political ramifications. Uh, if it wasn't for the last line of this story really would be the story of a family just trying to figure out how to get through life, almost a soap opera, if you will. And then again, until we get to the end, literally the last line. So it's a really interesting story from the standpoint of its simplicity and it's also um, its message that becomes one of the most important messages in the Bible. It's a message that sometimes people would say the purpose of this story is to really get through to us what should be our real values. And so again, there are some people who think that in within this simple story is actually a bigger polemic for the Jewish community, which would maybe point to when it was written. The setting of the story is during the time of Judges. And we know that because it says right away, Vayehi bimei shofet hashoftim, during the time when the judges judged, or as it says here, the chieftains ruled. Uh, but again, the note here is going to say the judges. This is before the monarchy. This is before the time of King Saul, King David, etc. Just before, as we're about to see, or as we'll see at the end. It's before that time. So maybe like 100 years before that time. So that would put it around 1100, which is between the time of Joshua and Moses, leading the people and then Joshua taking them in to the time when King David and the kings take over, which is about 200 years later. So it's in that period of time when Israel has no king and when there are still very much a tribal situation as far as the confederation. And whether or not it was actually written during that time is an interesting question. So we kind of look at sometimes the biblical language, the references here. There definitely seems to be an understanding that it wasn't written during the time that it was supposed to take place, because if it was, you couldn't get the ending of the story the way we have it. That being said, it still doesn't answer how late was it actually written. And some people feel that it wasn't written until actually the Israelites returned back from the Babylonian exile, which would be about 500 years later. So if that's the case, then the story would have been written 500 years after it happened, which means that the story is very much one that would have been looked at as a tale of um, of not necessarily mythological significance, because it's not that ancient and it's not like explaining how the world came into existence, and it's not explaining, how a god conquered, the winds or something like that. But there is a sense maybe that this is kind of a wistful look back at the way life was like uh, back in the day, and what lessons maybe could be learned against a backdrop like that. So there's maybe some sense of nostalgia to this too. Um, all of those things are things that we will kind of maybe come back to when we finish this story. It's 4 chapters. It's a very short story. Um, to put into perspective again, as far as the amount of verses and things like that, it's very similar in some ways to the book of Jonah, which is also 4 chapters, and also isn't necessarily mythological, but was probably written with a polemic and maybe a similar polemic to it. And then also with a sense that, I mean, Jonah definitely has more mythological or wondrous, miraculous occurrences in it, but there definitely seems to be like, here's a story about somebody that you all know about. Let's tell you the story kind of really about that person, or give you a little lesson from their lives. Interesting question. Could it be the same author as Jonah? It's possible. Most people would look at some clues here to say, while it may not be the same author, it might have been written around a similar time. Um, but again, it's hard to know who wrote these texts, but they are similar in, like I said, it's not just similar because it's 4 chapters, but there is a similar kind of vibe to it, which is, what can we learn? Let's learn a little lesson here from our ancestors, if you will, as they play out this story. So it's kind of almost as if you told a story about George Washington that didn't quite exactly happen, like maybe chopping down the cherry tree kind of thing. But what do we learn from that? What do we learn from that type of story? Uh, and so in that case, um, the people did exist, but maybe not quite this way. But again, the setting is the time of Judges, which is about 3,100 years ago. And it takes place in an area where we're going to see right away in the tribe of Judah, which is the lower half, central lower half, center to lower half of lower part of Israel. The tribe of Judah becomes its own kingdom, obviously, as we've talked about before. But it also is important to remember that part of this story takes place on the other side of the Jordan River in the country of Moab. And what we know about Moab from the Bible is that Moab is one of our cousins, if you will, a cousin through Abram or Avram before he becomes Abraham. His nephew Lot um, has a couple of children and also grandchildren through his daughters in that very strange story of Lot's daughters. Um, and we know about the Moabites because they're mentioned several times in the Bible. And again, on the other side of the Jordan River, in what today would be the nation of Jordan. So, for those who went to Petra with us, that would be in the place of Moab. The Moabites disappear. We don't hear about them ever again, really, after the destruction of the time of the destruction of the temple by the Babylonians. The Babylonians also took over Moab. And the Moabites, unlike the Israelites, never come back. We don't know what happens to them after. They get mixed up. The area gets taken over by the Nabateans, who are the people um, who build Petra and become the ancestors to the Arabs who live in that area. And so that area on the other side of the Jordan River, and what is today modern Jordan, is largely desert. It's largely uh, it's got a lot of hills like the Judean hills. And quite frankly, it is not there. There is no good border between Moab and Judah. There was never a good a good a good border between those areas. And I'll show you right now, just real quick on the map. There's where the 12 tribes were. There's Judah, there's Moab and Edom. So there you have the Dead Sea. This is Ammon, the other son slash grandson of Lot. And then there's Edom, the Edomites. So you can see Judah is here, Moab and Edom. The northern kingdoms are on this side. But there's never really a border between these two sides of the Jordan River. The only time we ever have a border between Israel and Jordan as a border created by the Jordan River, which is here, and then the Dead Sea, we call again the Jordan Rift Valley, is since 1948. There never was a border between these two countries. During the Roman times, during the Turkish times, during any times, there's never been a border between these two areas. Now, I'm not saying that there shouldn't be. I'm not, this is not a political statement for the fact that the nation of Jordan never existed, but it didn't until 1947. Jordan never existed as a country. It was a fantasy. It was a creation by the British to give the Hashemites, who were their allies against the Turks, an area that they could call their own. But there was never a Jordan. There was never a border between these two because the Jordan is too narrow of a river. It's not a natural boundary. And then down here, there is no boundary. I mean, there's essentially a wadi, or there's a wash, but it's like the Santa Clarita River behind our synagogue. It does not make a defensible boundary. So there never was a boundary between these two areas. And so during again, Roman times, Crusader times, Turkish times, there is never a border between these areas because there isn't a good place to put a border. And again, when the British and the French carved up the Middle East, they partitioned Israel. They came up with a partition plan, and that Jordan River became the border. Again, I'm not making any statements about what should happen today. I'm just telling you there never was a border. So it doesn't exist, and that's why wherever the Moabites lived within that boundary, we don't know how many of them there were. By the way, there maybe were at most maybe 100,000, 150, maybe 150,000 Moabites based on archaeology. It wasn't like a big kingdom. It wasn't like a big area. It was probably 10 or 11 major cities, and or not even cities, but towns, villages, and then there were smaller villages or kind of little hamlets that where people lived with 10 or 11 families in them. So and by the way, that's much of what the tribes of Israel looked like then too, during this time. We know that from the archaeology. We know that from the sustainability of the land in those period, in those times. So that being said, that's what we know about the backdrop of this story, and we're going to dive into it now. I'll also point out to you right off the bat, some of this story seems a little bit of a lesson because the names of the characters in this story seem to be symbolic rather than like necessarily real. So I'll point out to you as we get through this. So, Rosemary, if you'd like to start.
In the days when the chieftains ruled, there was a famine in the land, and a man of Bethlehem in Judah, with his wife and 2 sons, went to reside in the country of Moab. The man's name was Elimelech, his wife's name was Naomi, and his 2 sons were named Mahlon and Chilion, Ephrathites of Bethlehem in Judah. They came to the country of Moab and remained there. Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. They married Moabite women, one named Orpah and the other Ruth, and they lived there about 10 years. Then those 2, Mahlon and Chilion, also died, so the woman was left without her 2 sons and without her husband.
Okay, so that's the setup of the story. Those 5 verses are the setup of the story. That's the setup. It's not a lot of detail, obviously. It's 5 verses. But we know that there's a family that left Judah to live in Moab. They went over across the border and lived in Moab. And then the men all died. And then there's essentially now three women left: Naomi, Orpah, and Ruth. And yes, Orpah is the original name for Oprah. It was a transcription error of her family that her name became Oprah instead of Orpah, which now even sounds like it couldn't. Yeah, how could you, Orpah Winfrey or Orpah Winfrey? I don't know, but yeah,
Do the names have meaning?
They do, and let's definitely talk about that.
Okay.
So and that's actually one of the clues that this story might be uh, somewhat fantastical. Now, the we're going to get into a new name in a second, but to look at what the names mean, um, uh, look, some of the names are, I mean, they could have been their names. Like that's so the name Ruth means a friend or companion, right? Naomi, which is not a uncommon name, means pleasantness or delight. Okay. That's, well, those are all nice names. Elimelech means God is my, Eli is my God, is El is my king. But now we're going to get to the next names, which are the names of the sons, right? Chilion means wasting away. And machlon means sickness. Orpah means maybe a fawn, like a deer. But who names a kid sickness and the other one wasting? It doesn't
Maybe
seem
you're
like a
trying to cheat the
normal,
evil eye. That's the only thing I could think of.
maybe, but it seems pretty tough to name
Mm,
your kids sickness and wasting.
mm,
So they died and they weren't old and they didn't have kids.
mm.
And before we move any further, if there's a lesson to be learned from this story, and the rabbis definitely derive the midrash on this story is fascinating because the rabbis are deriving meaning and some of it's obvious, but I'm just going to ask you, all of you, why do you think the rabbis think that these guys all died? What did they do that caused their premature deaths? What do you think? Why do you think Machlon and Chilion, Elimelech might have died? He was a little older. He already had kids. But why do you think Machlon and Chilion died before they even have children? What did they do that warranted such a sad and early death?
They
Anybody?
married Moabite women?
Oh, that could be a big thing, right? They married
Yeah.
Moabite women. That's a big thing. But what did all of them do? Definitely the dad did it, and then the kids really did it. Well, the kids continued it. Let's put it
They
that way.
left Israel.
Yep, exactly. You nailed it, Gail. They abandoned Israel, and they abandoned Israel at a bad time. They abandoned Israel during a famine, and that's not good. You run away from Israel, and you abandon Israel, and it's there's tremendous guilt about it. Ask Israelis today, by the way. I'd say the majority of Israelis, if you ask them how they feel about leaving Israel, a majority of them, that means more than 50%, have feelings of guilt and have feelings of feeling like they abandoned their families and their country. Now, it doesn't mean people who leave America don't have similar feelings. I'm sure there are. But the majority of Americans that I've talked to, including ones who are leaving like today, generally speaking, are not happy with America or they're feel very little sense of guilt in leaving America. Now, partly that's because for most of us, our families have been here for 3, maybe 4 generations tops, sometimes 2. But there's not necessarily the feeling like this is our homeland or that this is the country that we lived in for generations upon generations. But there's also a feeling like Jews are Luftmenschen and can live anywhere, right? We're air people and we can go anywhere. But there's definitely a feeling when Jews leave Israel, especially those who've been born there or who've been there, again, some of those families have not been there for more than 1 or 2 generations, but there's still a feeling of abandonment. And the commentators on this from an early age said, yeah, these guys are bad people. They left Israel and they tried to assimilate within Moab. And so they essentially are asking for this kind of punishment. So there was definitely a sense like these people are not good people and they don't have good names to begin with. So the story almost becomes like a like real like polemic against a few things, including abandoning your people. But keep this in mind as we go through this story. Uh, what are the messages? What are the lessons that we're supposed to take away from this? So
Are
yeah,
there is there the same kind of commentary about Jacob leaving Israel that during the famine there?
well, yeah, he didn't want to, right? He didn't want to leave. His
Right.
family took him. Jacob Jacob left because his kids essentially said, "Hey, Joseph's down in Egypt. Let's go." Abraham leaves during the famine and then comes back. But when he goes down to Egypt, what happens to him? His wife gets taken away from him, right?
Yeah.
And the only patriarch who does not go to Egypt is, of course, Isaac. And Isaac is the one who lives the longest. He lives 180 years. So, the rabbis see some kind of message in that he is rewarded because of his faith, not just in God, but his faith in Israel. Anyways, the point is that yes, this is not a good thing. This is a guy who abandoned his family, or abandoned his larger family, his people, and so his family, his immediate family, suffers the consequences for it. Not an easy story to when you think about that immediate lesson from this and what the consequences are for his now wife Naomi, who's left with nobody except for her daughter-in-law. So we'll see what happens with that. So let's keep going.
She started out with her daughters-in-law to return from the country of Moab, for in the country of Moab she had heard that the Lord had taken note of his people and given them food.
So she heard that things got better back in Judah. Okay. And that God, right? It says right there, talk about where we start seeing God's name. God taken note of us and he gave us food, lechem. That's the word. Lachem, lechem, which is, by the way, a play on the word lechem, lachem, lechem. Gave to them bread.
Accompanied by her two daughters-in-law, she left the place where she had been living, and they set out on the road back to the land of Judah. But Naomi said to her two daughters-in-law, "Turn back, each of you, to her mother's house. May the Lord deal kindly with you, as you have dealt with the dead and with me. May the Lord grant that each of you find security in the house of a husband." And she kissed them farewell. They broke into weeping and said to her, "No, we will return with you to your people." But Naomi replied, "Turn back, my daughters. Why should you go with me? Have I any more sons in my body who might be husbands for you?"
And again, that's the law of levirate marriage, right? That there could be a child that she could have that could be their husbands, which would be kind of weird because they'd be at least like 25, 30 years older than the kid. But technically speaking, that's the law of levirate marriage. They'd be tribal inheritors through her. She doesn't have any kids. She says, I can't have any kids. I'm not going to have any kids. So you got to go back, find your own husbands.
"Turn back, my daughters, for I am too old to be married. Even if I thought there was hope for me, even if I were married tonight, and I also bore sons, should you wait for them to grow up? Should you, on their account, debar yourselves from marriage? Oh, no, my daughters, my lot is far more bitter than yours, for the hand of the Lord has struck out against me." They broke into weeping again, and Orpah kissed her mother-in-law farewell. But Ruth clung to her.
There you go. That's the critical scene right there, right? Orpah says goodbye, kissed her mother-in-law goodbye, but Ruth clings to her. Davka ba. That's the Hebrew word, davka ba. It was like she was glued to her. Okay.
So she said, "See, your sister-in-law has returned to her people and her gods. Go follow your sister-in-law." But Ruth replied, "Do not urge me to leave you, to turn back and not follow you. For wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God." Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. Thus and more may the Lord do to me, if anything but death parts me from you.
Now, that goes down. It's still very powerful to read that for the 400th time or however many times I've read that. That's still one of the most powerful lines in the whole Bible. Because those lines that Ruth says to her mother-in-law, where you go, I will go. Wherever you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God, are the words that converts still say to this day when they enter the covenant and they become Jewish. They quote Ruth and recite these lines. It's part of the traditional process of going through Gerut, of conversion. The the paragon of converts in our tradition is Ruth. It's not a guy, it's a woman. So there were other cases of men who go through conversion, a covenanting to the people. The one that we read about in the book of Kings, the story of Naaman, king of the Syrians, the chief of staff to the king. Naaman, when he's the main general, when he converts, goes through a conversion process. He's a dignitary. He's an important guy, but his words don't become part of the ritual of conversion. Ruth's do, and Ruth's act of love for her mother-in-law becomes almost the highest level of care for a parent, or in this case, again, one's in-laws, that you could possibly ever have. And so when you see this, and again, it's kind of a old trope, very well-known rundown trope that, people can't stand their in-laws. There's other obviously very powerful cases of people who've become very close to their in-laws, that they really do feel like they're their parents, or they're, people that they would really do anything for. And so this is definitely a case of those type of feelings. And so beyond just the issue of conversion and people attaching themselves to the people, there's a issue of this familial loyalty, which is so powerful in this story. And I've seen it happen. I've seen it happen in my own family, where people become so close to their in-laws that the relationship is it's amazing, because the people have they have a relationship that transcends just the marriage in a way, right? They're brought together by marriage, but they have a relationship that's very real. Yeah. So
Mark?
Ruth also, yeah, sorry, keep going. Yeah.
That's okay. I will continue that and say I have a fabulous mother-in-law. But you were talking about Ruth being the paragon of converts. How does that connect to her being an ancestor of Jesus?
We're not getting there yet.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Hold it. Come on, Judith.
Sorry.
The spoiler alert. The story becomes, for me, it's got such modern implications, because, oftentimes people will come to me and go through the conversion process years, in some cases decades after marriage. Well, this is at least a decade after the marriage. They were married for 10 years, it says, before he died. So she's been a part of that family. Ruth has been a part of the family for years. And now she finally says, at this point, because this is the point that she can go another direction. She could go off with Orpah, right? Here, look at this next thing.
When Naomi saw how determined she was to go with her, she ceased to argue with her, and the two went on until they reached Bethlehem. When they arrived in Bethlehem, the whole city buzzed with excitement over them. The women said, "Can this be Naomi?"
Yeah, that's not a good thing, by the way. When they see Naomi come back, the understanding is, oh, remember this woman was really wealthy when she left? She was really, really wealthy. She got out of here during the famine, right? You know, the stock market tanked and then she left. And then she came back. They thought she was gonna, she had done so well when she got out and things were tough. No, came back. She's even worse. Didn't work out well for her. So it's a cautionary tale. She's already a cautionary tale. Look, the fact that she comes back with nothing other than Ruth with her. I mean, that's a critical moment because her old friends, her family, the people that she left behind, see this probably fairly disheveled woman who went out, kind of a, upper class person, and is now coming back. The modern version is coming back in a beat up station wagon with her daughter-in-law with nothing. She left in a Mercedes and came back like this. That's what you're supposed to see. That's what you're supposed to imagine. If we're retelling this story today, that's what happens. Yeah, she leaves in a Mercedes with her husband and two boys, dressed up, little suits, little kid suits. And they come back, they're gone. Everything's gone. She's coming back in a station wagon, beat up, barely making it up the road, the farm road back to Kansas. That's what this is. Look, we don't know what happens to Orpah. We don't know what happens to her. She's done. There's no mention of her anymore. But the rabbis wanted to imagine what happens to her. We'll come back to that when we get to the end. What happens to Orpah and her family. So there you go. There's Naomi showing up back home, back in Kansas, back in the heartland. But she tells
Do
the
not
people,
call me Naomi, she replied. Call me Mara, for Shaddai has made my lot very bitter. I went away full, and the Lord has brought me back empty. How can you call me Naomi when the Lord has dealt harshly with me, when Shaddai has brought misfortune upon me?
yeah, so don't look, the names are not insignificant here, right? She wants to be called by a different name because she doesn't think she should even be called Naomi anymore. So the names are very significant. The names are not stuff we gloss over and say, oh, they just happen to be named this. No, we know that biblical characters got renamed. They took on new names. Names are important because they reflected what people felt about themselves in some cases. They named themselves. In some cases, God named them. I don't want to be called Naomi anymore. It's silly. It's ridiculous. You're going to call me Naomi? Pleasantness? I'm bitterness. That's what Mara means, bitter. Call me bitter. And now let's go because we're almost done with the setup. But this is
Thus Naomi returned from the country of Moab. She returned with her daughter-in-law Ruth the Moabite. They arrived in Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest.
which is actually Pesach, the barley harvest. So that's the setup. And you could have said, like, what's the point? That's the point. They come during the barley harvest. This is the setup. So everything you read before that then lands with this. They're in Bethlehem. It's the beginning of the barley harvest. And now the story unfolds back in the land of Israel. The rest of the book takes place in Judah, and within the tribe of Judah.
Now, Naomi had a kinsman on her husband's side, a man of substance, of the family of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, I would like to go to the fields and glean among the ears of grain behind someone who may show me kindness. Yes, daughter, go, she replied. And off she went. She came and gleaned in a field behind the reapers, and as luck would have it, it was the piece of land belonging to Boaz, who was of Elimelech's family. Presently, Boaz arrived from Bethlehem. He greeted the reapers. The Lord be with you. And they responded, The Lord bless you. Boaz said to the servant who was in charge of the reapers, Whose girl is that? The servant in charge of the reapers replied, She's a Moabite girl who came back with Naomi from the country of Moab. She said, Please let me glean and gather among the sheaves behind the reapers. She has been on her feet ever since she came this morning. She has rested but little in the hut.
So let's just explain what just happened here. So Boaz is the owner of the field that she's in. What's going on? According to the biblical law, right? In the Torah, it says, when you are harvesting your field, you need to allow there to be gleanings that fall. So what's interesting about this is it says there are reapers in the field that are working. Now, generally speaking, what does this mean? Boaz hires farmhands to reap his harvest. They're not on staff all the time. It doesn't make any sense to have these people on staff all the time. But when it's time for the harvest, he lets them harvest. He doesn't let them, he pays them. He allows them to take some of the grain home. These are workers. These are migrant workers, probably the modern equivalent to this. Except in those days, you didn't get paid. You got to keep the grain yourself. You got to keep, let's say you harvested, 100 sheaves that day. You get to keep 2 or you get to keep 3, whatever the percentage was that so these reapers are all working. Now the people like Ruth that are walking behind them are not even migrant workers. These are people who are essentially beggars. These are people who are literally there to pick up the gleanings, to pick up the stuff that falls back. The reapers are not allowed to go back and pick it up. Once it falls, it's a free for all for those people. She's walking behind them, picking up that stuff, the stuff that's left behind. Okay, so Boaz learns essentially that this woman is there as the equivalent is having almost a homeless person living on your or working on your property. Okay, everybody get that? Mm-hmm. Now, whatever Ruth is, she catches his eye. He sees her. He notices her. So whatever it is that she has, Boaz does see something there. And he asks who she is, and then he's told. And she's told that she's been working all day, right? So now here's what Boaz does. Everybody sees, so he sees her. He asks about her.
Boaz said to Ruth, "Listen to me, daughter. Don't go to glean in another field. Don't go elsewhere, but stay here, close to my girls. Keep your eyes on the field they are reaping and follow them. I have ordered the men not to molest you. And when you are thirsty, go to the jars and drink some of the water that the men have drawn."
So he's going to take care of her. He's basically protecting her. Molesting doesn't necessarily mean in the full terms of like physically molesting you, but they're going to stay away from you. They're going to leave you alone. I'm giving you protection. You're under my direct protection. I own these fields, and if I tell people you're left alone, you're going to be left alone. I'm going to take care of you while you're here. Okay? And you're going to be able to drink. You don't even have to bring your own water with you. Go down to the well and you'll get food. You'll get water. I'm taking care of you. All right?
She prostrated herself with her face to the ground and said to him, "Why are you so kind as to single me out when I am a foreigner?" Boaz said in reply, "I have been told of all that you did for your mother-in-law after the death of your husband, how you left your father and mother and the land of your birth and came to a people you had not known before. May the Lord reward your deeds. May you have a full recompense from the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have sought refuge."
Yep. Tachat knafav, under the wings. This is the phrase that we still use to this day to talk about somebody who's become Jewish to some extent. We don't say they've been born again or that they've, crossed over or they've seen the light or whatever the other terms that you hear in other faiths or, you're under the wings. They're under the wings. And we still, the rabbis use that term, and I wouldn't say necessarily we use that term so much anymore, but we talk about under the wings, tachat konfei ha-shechina, that people who have become Jewish are under the wings of the Shekhinah. They have divine protection. I don't know that people who are Jewish always feel that they're under the wings of the Shekhinah, but the idea is that we are. That we're protected under the wings.
I know we're supposed to think of eagles here, but I'm thinking of mother hens.
Okay. Yes, that's nice too. But they probably were talking about
Yeah.
more like eagles. But yes, the under those wings is again, I think for the animals that for the birds, for the really big, massive, um, beautiful birds, that the fact that those birds that are impressive can also protect their young was something that, you know, the rabbis and even before that, the Bible sees as a characteristic that strength doesn't necessarily mean that you're not protecting your young and that you're, again, just hunting, if you will. You're also protecting. So it's a beautiful phrase that Yeshalem Adonai. So again, God's name is mentioned here a few times. It's not, again, necessarily God doing anything, that God does these things, but that God is invoked for protection, and also to some extent, like, did God abandon me? Is God protecting me? Is God abandoning me? All these kinds of ideas, that you can see even in the ancient world, people kind of were speaking in these ways. This is not new stuff. This is where it comes from. All right, so Boaz is very impressed with her in many ways.
She answered, "You are most kind, my lord, to comfort me and to speak gently to your maidservant, though I am not so much as one of your maidservants." At mealtime, Boaz said to her, "Come over here and partake of the meal and dip your morsel in the vinegar." So she sat down beside the reapers. He handed her roasted grain, and she ate her fill and had some left over. When she got up again to glean, Boaz gave orders to his workers. "You are not only to let her glean among the sheaves without interference, but you must also pull some stalks out of the heaps and leave them for her to glean, and not scold her."
Yeah, so you're not just going to make sure she can glean. You're going to make sure she actually, put the stuff in her bag, so to speak. Make sure she has stuff. So he is very impressed with her, and he's feeding her, he's protecting her, and now he's making sure that hey, she's got the stuff. We call this leket, the gleanings, leket. All right. Any questions? Any comments so far as we go through chapter 2?
I thought leket meant to go. No?
No, la lechet
Yeah.
with a kaf and a taf. This is leket with a kuf and a tet. And so you'll see this in Israel. There are a few organizations that do like food pantries and stuff like that. They're called leket, or they use a form of leket in their names, in their charity names, because they know that it's like people who know the Bible and who know what the word's full meaning is. Gleanings are those things that the poor are entitled to, right? That they're entitled to the leket, to the gleanings. So
Okay.
it's a biblical word, and one that again reminds us that we're supposed to have some things left from our bounty for the poor.
She gleaned in the field until evening. Then she beat out what she had gleaned. It was about an ephah of barley, and carried it back with her to the town. When her mother-in-law saw what she had gleaned, and when she also took out and gave her what she had left over after eating her fill.
Oh, I wanted to first tell you, um, this is about 30 pounds of barley. That's a lot.
That's a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot. It's enough to sell if you had to, right? So
Mhm.
you're not going to eat 30. You're
You
not going
can't
to eat
eat
30.
30 pounds of
You better
barley.
not eat 30 pounds of barley, because that's gonna do numbers on your intestines. But yeah, it's not expensive grain. Barley is the cheapest grain, if you will, but that's still a lot. That's a lot. That's enough to sell. Yeah.
Her mother-in-law asked her, "Where did you glean today? Where did you work? Blessed be he who took such generous notice of you." So she told her mother-in-law with whom she had worked, saying, "The name of the man with whom I worked today is Boaz." Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, "Blessed be he of the Lord, who has not failed in his kindness to the living or to the dead." For, Naomi explained to her daughter-in-law, the man is related to us. He is one of our redeeming kinsmen.
Wow, that's the guy. He's the guy. He's our relative. He is somebody who kind of is related, he's related to the sense that he's a guy who can kind of adopt us, if you will, right? Yeah.
Ruth the Moabite said, "He even told me stay close by my workers until all my harvest is finished." And Naomi answered her daughter-in-law Ruth, "It is best, daughter, that you go out with his girls and not be annoyed in some other field."
Now, the question is, well, I think it's kind of obvious. Ruth um, was lucky that she was in the place that she needed to be, right? Which was Boaz's fields. And Naomi confirms all this. You can already see Naomi's wheels are turning, right? She's thinking about what's going to happen now, right? She wants to make sure that Ruth doesn't go anywhere else. Don't go anywhere else. You're going to get annoyed in another field. You're going to have to start over again. So even though the argument can be made, look, go to another field and see maybe you can get the same amount somewhere else. We're starting over the next day. They're going to be gleaning. They're going to be reaping in someone else's fields. There's going to be a whole nother set of, go back. It's going to decrease every day, right? But these reapers would go from field to field, and the next day they can go to someone else's field and start reaping there. And she gets another, 20 pounds, 30 pounds of grain. That's good. But she's basically saying, no, stay there. Even if it's not as, the implication here is even if it's not going to be as bountiful as yesterday, why would you start over, right? Don't go somewhere else. Could be problems in that place. You're a single woman, right? That's what she basically says, right?
So she stayed close to the maidservants of Boaz and gleaned until the barley harvest and the wheat harvest were finished. Then she stayed at home with her mother-in-law.
So the assumption is that during this period of time, she's in the fields, and she's in the fields for multiple days, and in this case, weeks, because according to our Torah, the barley harvest is at Passover, and the wheat harvest is at Shavuot, which is 7 weeks later. So that's a long time, right? That's, if you think about it, it's like 2 months that she's with Boaz in his fields. They're harvesting the barley, and then they harvest the wheat. So it also seems that at least some of those nights she was not at home. She was out in the fields. Okay. Well, what's going on when that's happening? That's where we're going to get to.
Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, "Daughter, I must seek a home for you, where you may be happy. Now there is our kinsman Boaz, whose girls you were close to. He will be winnowing barley on the threshing floor tonight. So bathe, anoint yourself, dress up, and go down to the threshing floor. But do not disclose yourself to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, note the place where he lies down, and go over and uncover his feet and lie down. He will tell you what you are to do." She replied, "I will do everything you tell me."
Yeah. Now that scene in particular, the harvesting is over, and now they're starting to prepare the wheat, which means they brought it into the silos, they brought it into the buildings for storage, and they're now going to be, well, in this case, it's the barley. They're starting the process of essentially preparing it, right? They're now going to process the barley. And so this stuff is going to not be happening out in the fields. This is going to be happening in a threshing room, which probably was not great air to breathe, if you want to know the truth, but they didn't know that then. But they had to keep the barley in such a way that obviously that they could separate out the good stuff, right? So that's what they're
So do you
working
know
on.
how they do this? I mean, they do lift it up and shake it? Is what they do?
Oh, I mean, yeah, essentially they beat the stuff out. They beat the kernel out, and then the chaff gets separated. They throw that stuff out, or they feed it to the animals, and then they're able to grind what's left over down into the flour. So,
So they use like a big wheel type thing and
well,
lift it
once
up?
that's how they mill, yeah, when they mill it. But first, they use these kinds of like paddles to separate the grain,
I'll have to watch
the
that.
good
Thank
stuff.
you. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so
In Eastern Europe,
before they can even mine it, I mean, mill it. I'm sorry, they have to first separate it. They have to get the bad stuff out. So a lot of the stuff was not even going to be ground down. Yeah.
in Eastern Europe, when I was younger, they used to put the grain out on the road so that the cars going over it would fresh it.
Yeah.
Really?
Yes.
So it's a hard nut. It's like a
It's
little.
yeah, it's kind of like there's like a bit of a shell over it, softer than a shell, but you want to crack that off. It's hull, that's what it is.
And
Yeah,
You
then
but
you
want to
the
have
get
to
the
shake
hull
it.
off and get the kernel that's inside.
yeah,
Yes,
but
you want the kernel and not the hull.
Right.
even before
Okay.
that though, even before they got to the point of crushing it, right? Um, even before you get to that, you have to thresh it, right? Threshing
Yeah, there's
and
a
when you thresh it, you're actually creating, this kind of taking out the edible part of it from from the stalk, from the straw. So you first had to get the stalk. You had to get the kernels off the stalk. So once you had the edible part, then you get it down. And you know, it's now it's all done by machines and it's all done, yeah, yeah. We
if
found
you heard the
threshing.
story of the little red hen when you were little, all that she goes through all the steps of making the grain to
Yeah,
flour.
Yeah.
that's right.
So this was a big process, and it was one of the reasons why if you can even grow this grain, then when you're left with the product, with the final product, it was very valuable because it had to go through all these steps. And once you're selling the grain, then you've created you've created not just something you need to live, but it's a product. It's a valuable product. Um, and this area of Bethlehem was the breadbasket of ancient Israel. The word Bethlehem means the house of bread. Beit Lechem. So this is the name of the place. That's why I say it's like Kansas. It's the heartland, the agricultural heartland of the country. And so these people are farmers. They're not just farmers, they're grain farmers. Barley is the cheapest of the grains. The wheat was more expensive because it was harder to grow and you got less yield out of it. The barley was much hardier, would survive worse weather conditions. And so the barley was produced at a higher level, but was also therefore, because of the supply, was cheaper, and it was also not as good. From the stand, I mean, you could love barley, but generally speaking, people, even in the ancient world, would prefer to have their grain out of wheat rather than barley. Barley bread was not something people necessarily wanted to eat. They had to eat it. So anyway, so Boaz is going to be there in the overseeing his next step of his process. And again, there probably were some workers that did everything, reaping and threshing, but there might have been specialists that were brought in just for threshing. Meanwhile, she's now not just with the reapers, she's now going into the next step, which is yeah. So we don't know for sure what it means to say when she says uncover his feet. Raglo tav. Sometimes feet is a euphemism for his entire undercarriage, if you will, everything underneath the tunic. Um, could be. It could be. It could be symbolic. It could be that by doing that, she's basically saying she's available. The point is that she is definitely putting herself within his protection and within his ability to have access to her, if you will. Because when Naomi says this to her, she's basically saying, here's how you're going to get set up with him. Now, we're supposed to assume that Boaz is considerably older than Ruth. I mean, he addresses her right off the bat as daughter. Is it that much of an age difference? Possible. It's possible. Because if Boaz is a kinsman of Naomi and her husband, right, Elimelech, then he's roughly Elimelech's age, or would Elimelech's age if he had survived. But it could be that there is a significant age difference between them. Significant age, you know. This is maybe again a May-December romance. But it's also, there seems to be ritual and there seems to be certain processes that are done that are acceptable ways of creating this next stage of the relationship. We might also assume, by the way, that Boaz is already married or has been married before, which, again, in the biblical period, he could have been married to a few other women, not even necessarily one by this point. But does Ruth have the ability to insert herself into his family? Well, they're related by marriage. And so it would definitely be within the realm of, we're taking care of family by this marriage. So if Boaz accepts her and says, yes, I'm going to take this woman on as my responsibility, he's essentially saying, she's a part of my family by marriage. I'm going to take care of her by marriage. And again, by our standards today, you'd be like, that's insane. But remember, it wasn't just being protected financially for the short term, but how's this woman going to be protected in the long term? And the reality is, the only way she's going to be protected in the long term is if she has a child in that family. Bottom line, you can say what you want. There is a only way of having full protection is to have a child with them. Again, in today's world, and let's say in California, for example, there is alimony, and alimony is the law. But in the ancient world, alimony only went so far. It went to the stage of saying, hey, the ketubah says this is how much money you get if I die or if we get divorced. This is how much you get. The only way you have constant stream of income is if you have property and if you have some type of ownership through a family connection and through having essentially children. Otherwise, there's no protection for you. None. Zero. So this is an important issue. This is like her life we're talking about here. What's going to happen to her? Let's say she's in her 30s, Ruth. What's going to happen to her for the next 50 years is being determined right now. This is important, very important for her future. So here we
She
go.
went down to the threshing floor and did just as her mother-in-law had instructed her. Boaz ate and drank, and in a cheerful mood went to lie down beside the grain pile. Then she went over stealthily and uncovered his feet and lay down. In the middle of the night, the man gave a start and pulled back. There was a woman lying at his feet. Who are you? He asked, and she replied, I am your handmaid Ruth. Spread your robe over your handmaid, for you are a redeeming kinsman.
So he doesn't know she's there until she wakes up in the middle of the night. Now it says he went to bed merry, which we're supposed to be Mary, right? Not Mary, M-A-R-Y, M-A-R-Y, M-E-R-R-Y. He was happy when he went to sleep. And he wakes up And he is even happier because there's a woman lying at his feet. At first, he's surprised, but then she tells him, I am Ruth, and you are a redeeming kinsman, which basically means you're eligible to take me in. And I'm willing. I'm here. I'm not going to make it at all hard. You're not going to have to chase me. Here I am, right here. Now, that's what it says happens.
Being an eligible
Yes.
kinsman also means that there's no dowry or any of that nonsense, right? Because it's already been paid.
Well, I think I think he already knew she had nothing, right? And that she had essentially no, he already knew that. What she's really saying to him now is, I'm interested, and I'm telling you, you're not going to be rebuffed if you come and say, I want to marry you. I'm telling you, I'm eligible. I'm interested. Right?
Why
I
did she
want this.
specifically say you're a redeeming relative or whatever the word is?
Yeah.
Because
She
doesn't
says,
that
she says,
doesn't that also give him obligation?
it does give him an obligation if he wants it, but he still has to want it. The issue is he knows that if he says, he doesn't even have to ask Naomi's permission. She's saying, I want to marry you. I'm willing to be married to you with again, I'm not going to play hard to get. There's no courtship needed. There's no, you don't have to come and ask Naomi, I'm interested in Ruth. She just cut all those steps, all of the courtship steps, all of the asking, all of the rituals, and all of the ceremony and performances that needed to go into this type of setup. She's saying we're cutting it all out. It's done. That's the way it seems to me. That's the way it was understood also to some extent. But I also think it just makes sense. Saying you don't have to be, there's no beating around the bush. This is clear. I like you. And if you like me, I can be yours tomorrow. Oh, he's going to give an answer right away.
He exclaimed, Be blessed of the Lord, daughter. Your latest deed of loyalty is greater than the first, in that you have not turned to a younger man, whether poor or rich. And now, daughter, have no fear. I will do in your behalf whatever you ask, for all the elders of my town know what a fine woman you are. But while it is true I am a redeeming kinsman, there is another redeemer closer than I. Stay for the night. Then in the morning, if he will act as redeemer, good, let him redeem. But if he does not want to act as redeemer for you, I will do so myself, as the Lord lives. Lie down until morning.
So he gives her an answer. Absolutely. I'm very interested in this. And hats off to you, because you could have gone after a younger person from the family, but you didn't. You chose me, and he's honored that she chose him. He says that, and he says you're an amazing woman. He says everyone knows that. The people in our town already know how special you are. And he says, I mean, look at the text. I will do this. Now, here's the problem. There is somebody else who's closer in relation, right? So if I'm a second cousin of Elimelech, there's a guy who's a first cousin. I mean, we don't know exactly. Maybe he's a third cousin, and there's a second cousin. Whatever there is someone who is closer related, who has a closer claim on this relationship. Because again, there is a business element to it, and not even just a business element, a tribal element, an element of ownership within the tribe that cannot be messed up. Because if you skip the levels, again, there's a problem, right? The society breaks down if we're not going to follow the rules. So we have to follow the rules. Look, we'll try. We're gonna put this out there to the other guy, to this closer guy, the guy that's technically next up. If he wants to marry you, we got to do it. We don't have a choice, because our society will not allow this to happen unless we go through this step. So again, we know that there's rituals, we know there's performance, we know there's there's legal ramifications to these marriages. So again, we're dealing with tribal inheritance. We're dealing with tribal percentages of the family businesses and of the tribal businesses. So this is why this is such an important issue. We have to get the blessing and the sign off, legal sign off, from the next closest relative. So wait until morning. We'll take care of it. And here's what it says.
So she lay at his feet until dawn. She rose before one person could distinguish another, for he thought, let it not be known that the woman came to the threshing floor.
Yeah, so she says, I got to get out of here, right? I'm going to get out of here early before anyone knows I'm here. So I do not, take care, guys. We got to know that everything is going to be okay. And that no one's going to know that this was planned ahead of time, right? We don't want there to be talk about this. Probably already was talk about it, but they want to limit it, right? If people see that she's there, then they're going to know that they were working together to do this. And part of what they have to now go through, this ritual of getting permission, getting release for this, it's really a release. In order to get this to happen, it's better if, again, it's seen as not like a setup, right? That we've been working on this for a while. So let's just make it seem like this is all above board, that there's not some funny business going along in the background. So here's what he says there.
And he said, hold out the shawl you are wearing. She held it while he measured out 6 measures of barley, and he put it on her back. When she got back to the town, she came to her mother-in-law, who asked, how is it with you, daughter? She told her all that the man had done for her. And she added, he gave me these 6 measures of barley, saying to me, do not go back to your mother-in-law empty-handed. And Naomi said, stay here, daughter, till you learn how the matter turns out. For the man will not rest, but will settle the matter today.
So Naomi tells her, stay at home. We'll see what happens. We'll see how this plays out. But this guy means business, right? He's going to take care of it. Again, it's hard for us to some extent to imagine what these kind of tribal rituals were. And you can see even within the story, this very simple story, and again, to some extent, if it was written hundreds of years after it had taken place, there's already a sense maybe that the people who wrote it are kind of they knew what was happening. It's not like some of these laws were maybe even still in effect, but they're kind of looking back on it and reconstructing the story around like the way they think maybe some of these things would happen. It's like, when we do like a medieval, like when we tell when we bring an Arthur story to light, we try to figure out, what did their armor look like, or what did these rituals look like when they went off to battle and those kind of things. We're imagining what they look like. We have some of the armor, and we have some, drawings and things like that we can go by. But a lot of it, we're kind of imagining. We know from texts, in some cases, some of the things that happened. But again, we're reconstructing it. And it could be there was some reconstruction going on here in the narrative of how these rituals were performed by our ancestors. Again, right, writing 500 years after, that some of these rituals had either kind of fallen out of fashion, or again, there just was no really purpose for them anymore.
So you think they were consciously writing this as a historical novel?
As historical fiction, if you will, like we would write historical fiction today. If we said a tale, some bodice ripper set during pirate times, we're imagining, this scene on a pirate ship. We have a setting, and this is the setting for it. So there is an element to that's probably at play here, but you can see even within the story that to some extent, and it's interesting because whether or not life changed a lot slower than it does today, right? So the difference between somebody living 1,000 BCE and 800 BCE there was not a fantastic difference between them. We generally will look at eras within the archaeological world when we're going back 3,000 years. We'll say, did they have iron yet? Right? Are they Bronze Age or are they Iron Age? And those, in some cases take hundreds of years for the development, for you to see a difference. What kind of pottery did they have? Did they have this kind of pottery or were they at this kind of pottery stage? So in some cases, again, these take hundreds of years for these things to change. So, today, if we look at what life was like 200 years ago, it was vastly different. What life was like 30 years ago is vastly different. Before we had an internet, I mean, you talk to people and it's hard to like, if you talk to somebody who had died 30 years ago and told them, yeah, I just got into a car with somebody because I dialed them up on my phone and I said, come pick me up. And I've never seen this person and I got in the back of their car. People would like, what are you talking about? That's insane. I said, no, it's Uber. Everybody does it. And you'd go, I just ordered something on the internet from, Brazil. It'll be here next week from a store that, nobody, I don't know anybody who's been in that store, but I bought it. I mean, people would just look at you like you're insane. So there are things that we do today that, again, 50 years ago, 100 years ago would have been, but in those days, maybe 300, 400 years ago, we can kind of reconstruct a little bit. We don't have to imagine it that much. And some of these things maybe had been phased out. And you see a difference here because what happens is that this story, when Ruth goes back to Naomi, they're in the town, right? They're in the town. And then she's going out to the farm, which is where the stories are taking place with Boaz. And you can see in that the difference between kind of an agricultural tribal setting and kind of what would happen in a city. Well, listen, if you're a city person, you don't want to be married to 10 women. You don't want to have multiple, divisions to your property. You live in that city, you have a business, you have a building that you live in, you have a factory or a shop that you own. You don't want to have lots of problems. And you can see that within the story to some extent, within the story itself, even if it's written by people who are familiar with these things, or again, somebody writing hundreds of years later, trying to imagine what it was like to make that transition from, a very agrarian type of society, a very, kind of tribal story to tribal society to a more urban society, right? Because the Jews were going through that during this period. They went from a tribal confederation into a nation where they had capital, Jerusalem, and they had cities that were big cities with lots of people living behind a wall. So you can see that in this story, right? You can see that even in the imagination of the story or within the story itself. You'll see what I mean in the next scene, in the final book, the final chapter in this book, in this chapter.
Meanwhile, Boaz had gone to the gate and sat down there. And now the Redeemer whom Boaz had mentioned passed by. He called, "Come over and sit down here, so-and-so." And he came over and sat down.
Yeah, we don't know the guy's name. We don't know the guy's name. His name is so-and-so. Ploni Almoni, which means John Doe. It means random guy. We don't know his name. Now, the Bible says we don't know his name because we don't want to make the guy look bad. Because what he does here is not a good thing. Now, it's a necessary thing. It turns out to be a great thing, but it's not a good thing because we're going to see what the guy does. So they're at the city gate. This is where the business is done. This is where people come in from their farms and their tribal portions. They come into the city gate. Now, again, assumedly, Ruth and Naomi are somewhere in the city living maybe they're living in a, piece of property that the family owned before that had fallen into disrepair in the city. Maybe they're living in a boarding house. We don't know in a sense. Like, it's not probably a good situation. But they're at the city gate is where this story is now taking place. So now Boaz is not on his farm. He's in town. He's in town.
Then Boaz took 10 elders of the town and said, "Be seated here." And they sat down. He said to the Redeemer, "Naomi, now returned from the country of Moab, must sell the piece of land which belonged to our kinsman Elimelech. I thought I should disclose the matter to you and say, acquire it in the presence of those seated here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you are willing to redeem it, redeem. But if you will not redeem, tell me that I may know. For there is no one to redeem but you, and I come after you. I am willing to redeem it, he replied. Boaz continued, when you acquire the property from Naomi and from Ruth the Moabite, you must also acquire the wife of the deceased, so as to perpetuate the name of the deceased upon his estate.
Yeah, and this is the law of the Levirate marriage. So he's saying it's Naomi and it's Ruth. And notice how they keep calling her the Moabite, right? They don't stop calling her the Moabite. It says Ruth HaMoabiyah. She's Ruth the Moabite. They knew her that way. It's Ruth the Moabite. You get to take on that responsibility. So you get the property. You can acquire the property. If you sign the deed, you do, but you have to take on this responsibility. You have to take care of these people. This is your responsibility. So that's the full thing. Now, was there a piece of property attached to them? Possibly. It's very possible that there was a piece of property that was attached to them. But regardless of whether there was or not, they're going to now have to step up and take care of the people attached to that property. And that's what happens here. So the guy is told, this is what you got to do. And what does he say?
The Redeemer replied, then I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I impair my own estate. You excuse me. Listen, when I was busy, can you come back later?
I forget to go potty when I need to.
That was
Sorry
cute.
about that.
That was cute. No, that was very cute, Rosemary.
The Redeemer replied, then I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I impair my own estate. You take over my right of redemption, for I am unable to exercise it.
So his words are, I pass, right? Don't include me in this deal because I can't do it. I can't take on the responsibility. Whatever my responsibilities are, I can't impair my own responsibilities by taking on this responsibility too. I'm fine without it. I'll pass. Yeah.
But he wants the land, but not the responsibility.
Well, he doesn't say that, but yeah, that could be the assumption. It could also be, by the way, that he just can't afford the land, right? I can't even take on the land. But whatever it is, he doesn't want the responsibility. Because again, taking on the land meant that he had to be responsible for maintaining the land. Now, if it was just the land, he could probably sell it to somebody else or, let someone else from the tribe take it over and he takes a cut on it from then on. But so let's say it's a piece of land. It's got to stay within the family. Remember, all of this is predicated on the fact that it's in the tribe of Judah. And then within the tribe of Judah, you've got clans, you've got families that have different properties. Can't have the property can't go out of the family. So if he says, okay, I can't take it over, but I have another cousin who can take it over. Maybe if I redeem it, if I sign over the deed, then I can take 10% and he'll run it. Now, because in this deal, you also have to take on the family, right? You have to take on Naomi and Ruth. And then the guy starts saying to myself, so he starts making the calculations, right? Oh, if I have to take on the responsibility of the family in addition to taking on the land, then I ain't going to make money on it. It's going to wind up costing me money. And so people made those calculations all the time. They made those calculations.
How did we not, in modern times, we don't do this. So how do the rabbis argue that we don't have to do this now? Or do we?
We'll get to that because here's the ritual. Here's the ritual.
Okay.
Now, this was formerly done in Israel in cases of redemption or exchange. To validate any transaction, one man would take off his sandal and hand it to the other. Such was the practice in Israel. So when the Redeemer said to Boaz, acquire for yourself, he drew off his sandal. And Boaz said to the elders and to the rest of the people, you are witnesses today that I am acquiring from Naomi all that belonged to Elimelech and all that belonged to Chilion and Mahlon. I am also acquiring Ruth the Moabite, the wife of Mahlon, as my wife, so as to perpetuate the name of the deceased upon his estate, that the name of the deceased may not disappear from among his kinsmen and from the gate of his hometown. You are witnesses today.
Yep. And so this is part of the act, the performance of this ritual, what we call chalitza, removing the sandal, meant that the person was giving up their responsibilities and their rights in that situation. So there was an out. The Bible talks about this. In the book of Deuteronomy, it talks about the chalitza ritual. It talks about the ritual that could be done for losing your responsibility. Because remember, it's not just taking care of the woman. It's basically saying that that child that that woman has isn't even your child. That child is the child of Machlon. It is not his child. It's like his name isn't even attached to that child. So not only does he not get the property to some extent in through him, his kids don't inherit the property. Ruth's children would inherit the property. So the children, not technically speaking, that's his child. It's not like he would, but his child wouldn't have his name. The child would technically be, whatever the kid's name would be. His name is Ralph, the son of Machlon. It's not his name, whose name, by the way, we never know. But to some extent, it doesn't matter because we don't know his name of this kid because it ain't going to be his kid. Now, everybody get that? Interestingly, by the way, there's a tip-off that this was written many years after when it happened, which is this was formally done in Israel in cases of redemption or exchange. It's basically saying, yeah, back then, this is the way they did things, which seems to indicate that they're not doing it anymore. Do you understand? They wouldn't have said that if they were still doing it. You don't have to qualify that statement with formally, we used to do this if you're still doing it. It almost means 100%, we don't do this anymore. So we were not doing this by the time that the story was written. Okay, so transitioning away from some of these tribal situations took time. Okay, but however much time passed, we're not doing this anymore. Okay. So it's done in front of witnesses, 10 witnesses. This is like a minion, right? But it's also, more importantly, a financial transaction that's witnessed, not just on the level of, hey, let's get a witness to notarize this. Let's get a group of people large enough to say, this affects the tribe, this affects our community, and let's make sure that this is being signed off at essentially in front of the town council. Let's get city council out here to verify this, to have it in the minutes, right? It's on the agenda. It's in the minutes now. It's been signed. The lawyers have seen it, and it's legit. It's now part of our history. It's going to be part of our history in a major way, right?
All the people at the gate and the elders answered, "We are. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your house like Rachel and Leah, both of whom built up the house of Israel. Prosper and Ephrathah and perpetuate your name in Bethlehem. And may your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah, through the offspring which the Lord will give you by this young woman."
Yeah. And so they have this whole ceremony, which is, may Lord build up your house like Rachel and Leah, right? Our matriarchs gave birth to all the 12 tribes. And in particular, our tribe, the tribe of Judah, has this wonderful story of Peretz, right? That's Tamar had two sons, Peretz and Semach, or Zerach, sorry, who are the children that Tamar has by going to Judah surreptitiously and getting impregnated so that she can carry on that line, who is our line. And the people don't remind us every part of that story, but they reminded us of that story. Right? We look at these stories, our ancestors even looked at these stories as stories of how we got to where we did through our families. Understand. Just remember something. This is important for our modern day mythology. Because, you could always be sent to the Rachel and Leah Center, also known as the Red Center. That's where they train handmaidens. Yep, the Handmaid's Tale. Yeah, it is the example of how we perpetuate our people through these relationships. And sometimes they work out in very big ways. Now, this wonderful praise of the women, right, of how they bear children and how they raise up the house. You're saying this in one of the craziest setup stories ever, which is Boaz, this older guy who is now taken on a woman who maybe is a generation removed from him, who's now going to be in a position to have a child. He'll have a child. Naomi will have a grandchild. Ruth will have a child now, and everyone will be happy. But this is not a story that you were supposed to go, this is the way things are supposed to be. But none of these stories are the way things are supposed to be. All of these stories are stories of people who have kids in some ridiculous way that beats the odds. And so every one of these fertility stories, if you will, in the Bible is a story of, it's not supposed to happen this way, but this is the way it happens. The Bible is filled with those stories, which is why I say, okay, maybe it's a fairy tale, but it ain't a traditional fairy tale. These are not the way the fairy tales work in the original Disney stories or in the original Grimm's stories. These stories are not the way things were supposed to happen. And here's the last part of it, my friends, the part that Judith tried to give away.
So Boaz married Ruth. She became his wife, and he cohabited with her. The Lord let her conceive, and she bore a son. And the women said to Naomi, "Blessed be the Lord who has not withheld a redeemer from you today. May his name be perpetuated in Israel. He will renew your life and sustain your old age, for he is born of your daughter-in-law, who loves you and is better to you than 7 sons."
Now, that's a beautiful piece of the story because it gets back to Naomi, right? Naomi, this woman who had a really bad life, winds up having a family after all. There's a legacy. She leaves behind something. And in those days, it made a difference to have somebody who carried on your lineage, right? Your legacy, right? In a physical sense. Very important. She's got that now. And what's beautiful about the story is it reminds us that as much as having a son is important, it's your daughter-in-law. It was Ruth who was better to you than 7 sons. Because you could have 7 sons and none of them would do the thing that Ruth did for you. So that's why Ruth is such an amazing person and why we got this book named after. But that's not the kicker, right? This is the kicker.
Naomi took the child and held it to her bosom. She became its foster mother, and the women neighbors gave him a name, saying, "A son is born to Naomi." They named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, father of David. This is the line of Perez. Perez brought Hezron. Hezron begot Ram. Ram begot Aminadab. Aminadab begot Nahshon. Nahshon begot Salmon. Salmon begot Boaz. Boaz begot Obed. Obed begot Jesse. And Jesse begot David.
Now, there's your line. There's your line from Jacob, Judah, and then Peretz. And there's your generations. These are generations, assumedly, right, that were in Egypt. And there's Nachshon that came out, and according to the story, walked into, it's not in the Torah, but the Midrashes, he walked up into his neck before the sea parted. And then these are the guys that live in the time of return, Salmon, and here's Boaz. And then Boaz begot Obed. That's the kid that he just had. His name was Obed. But wait a second. Didn't we just say that Machlon would be the name of the kid? Didn't we just say that it preserves the name of the person who actually was entitled to be perpetuated through Naomi? But in reality, it just went through Boaz. So
What does
Boaz,
the name Boaz mean?
So it's a construct of through strength, right? Through strength. But and Obed means essentially servant, right? Like the name Obadiah, Oved is a servant or a slave. Gosh, think about that right now. The story literally was not the way, not only was it not the way it should have been, but look at what just happened. This is how we got King David. That's it. Boaz, Obed, Jesse, David. Wow.
So why did the people who wrote this and made it a point to write it find it so important that Ruth be, I skipped a few generations, that Ruth, a Moabite, be the ancestress of David?
Well, first of all, it tells us. So if we have this, here's the line as it would appear in the Bible, right? Who begot who, which we never get the women. So the story just gave us a other story. This is the story behind the story. So if you looked at his lineage, right, this would be the lineage of King David, and that would be it. The Bible just gave us a story that, okay, we don't know for sure it happened. We don't. But there's at least a legend that it happened. And I do believe that there's a legend or that there was some story that David had a great grandmother who was a Moabite. Not the end of the world. First of all, in his time, it was all patriarchal, right? It was all patrilineal. It was passed down by your father. End of story. The rabbis want to tell you that Ruth converted before even Naomi seen that she had converted when she married Machlon. There's no evidence for that. There doesn't even say that. But they don't like it that it was patrilineal before, and the rabbis changed it. So they don't like that. So that just remember that we're coming from a standpoint where the people don't want to recognize that. As long as she converted, it was fine. But if she hadn't converted, then it was clearly patrilineal descent. Well, forget this story. Every story we have in the Bible of a person marrying a woman who was not an Israelite, which is like almost all of these people, including Tamar, who's a Canaanite, according to the Bible. We have a lot of ancestors, especially female ancestors, who are not from the Israelites. I mean, Joseph married an Egyptian woman. Moses married a Midianite woman. I cannot give you it's almost the exception who married a Jew from the men. So here's the story behind the story, because it gave us the matrilineal story. That's the whole story of Ruth, the majority of it, except for the last 5 lines or whatever, 6 lines. Those lines are all the story the way you normally would see it in the Bible. Who begot who from the men. But now we have the story of how Boaz even got into that line. So again, Boa, I just started watching, by the way, the King David show that's on Hulu or whatever it's on right now. The King David that was done. It was filmed with Israelis. It was financed by a Christian production company, but it was filmed with Israelis, and it's a fairly Jewish telling of the story of King David, at least so far, what I've seen and what I've read about it. So it's out there now. It's on the streaming thing right now.
It's interesting to see the way they live. They're pretty historical about that.
Yeah. Have you been watching it, Gail?
Yeah.
What do you think about it?
I think I told you it reminds me of Rome in that Rome was
Right.
so interesting. This is interesting too because I get to see how the people reacted and where they dressed and wore, and they're actually Israelis.
Yeah.
They're not a lot of blonde, blue-eyed people.
Yeah.
I like it.
And they're kind of showing how, I mean, some of it's based on Midrash, some of it's based on the stories that aren't there, which is that, that David himself is the son of a not prime wife, right? I think is kind of I haven't seen the whole thing, but I've seen enough to show that like he's not one of the main, he's not one of Jesse's, Yishai's one of his main kids. I think they're kind of implying that he's a son of a second wife, I think. It's kind of what I got from the first few episodes. So it's an interesting, they're trying to kind of keep it, it's on Amazon Prime, by the way. They're trying to
I
keep
didn't feel like it was real Christian. I didn't.
No, but it was financed actually. I mean, the people who created it and financed it are. But I think they really and the cast is virtually all Israeli. Just so you know, I mean, all the main, not all of them. I mean, like
Did they film it in Israel?
I noticed that they had Stephen Lang as Samuel, which was kind of an interesting choice because Stephen Lang is one of the more Gentile-looking actors that I've ever seen. But Stephen Lang is the guy who's usually a bad guy and stuff, but he's the bad guy in Avatar. But yeah, he's Samuel. I think they filmed it. I think they filmed it. I don't remember if they filmed it in Israel. I think they were going to. And let me just see if they actually filmed it there. But they really, no, they filmed it in Greece. Look, the reason that they cannot film movies in Israel, they looked at doing it in Israel initially. You cannot get insurance to film it in Israel. The companies will not get insured to film there, so they will not do it. And so it's kind of a problem. I wish it wasn't, but it is. So, the David story, and I know what I've seen already in the early episodes, the David story, what captivates people about the story so much about King David is Goliath, right? Goliath and that whole David versus Goliath scene, which is kind of the way we're introduced to King David. David the shepherd is through his battle with Goliath that they really use that as kind of like, we're going to build up this Goliath story. What's interesting about it is the actual midrash about Goliath, which is that Goliath, again, is from Gath. He's from the Philistine city. But according to the midrash, that's not his ancestry. He's not actually Philistine. He's also Moabite. The way the rabbis interpreted what happened to Orpah is that she's the great-grandmother of Goliath. So she had the potential, Orpah had the potential of being a great woman, but when given the same choice, she chose the wrong direction. She went the wrong way. And so what happens to her is she gives birth to a very powerful and great grandson, but he's not the good guy. He's the bad guy. So the rabbis never liked the fact that somebody really just disappears from the story. They like people having some connection. That's the wonderful thing about the Midrash too, is that it brings back people that we wondered, what happened to them? What was their real story? What's their name? Did they really just, that's it? And the rabbis don't like that. They don't like people not having once they're named, we got to know the rest of the story. So sometimes they brought these people back. It brought them back in interesting ways. So Yeah, David and Goliath would have been distant cousins. Interesting, right? It'd be like third cousins. The No, they'd be like second cousins. It's a weird story because um, if David is the descendant of Ruth, we don't seem to have an issue with the fact that he's not 100% Israelite. That's never really one of the issues that's brought up, because if we look back, every one of our ancestors has Moses, or again, any of the people from Judah who are descendants of Tamar are part Canaanite. We're all part Canaanite, that means. So, and we really, by the way, we don't know the main difference between a Moabite and an Israelite at this time. During this time, we don't know the difference, other than they worship different gods. The Moabites did not worship Adonai. They worshiped a god called Chemosh. But Chemosh seems to operate, at least for them. We don't have a lot of writings of the Moabites. We have the famous Mesha stele, and we know that in that they talk about the fact that they throw off the Israelite control, that the Israelites controlled them for a long time, and then they finally took off their authority and were able to rebel. But the Moabites talk about why that happened in very similar ways the way we talk about it in the Bible. When we say that we fell under the hand of the Philistines, or hand of the Moabites for that matter, it's God got mad at us and put us under their control. They say the same thing. Chemosh was mad at us and put us under the control of Israel, of Omri, King Omri. That's Ahab's father. And so for a while, the Israelite kingdom, the northern kingdom, controlled them for 100 years or so. And then King Mesha is able to take off the yoke of them. And that's actually in the book of Kings. It's a very strange story, one that gives just us more and just bizarre story of human sacrifice and the fact that the Moabites are able to break free. But breaking free, by the way, also in those days simply meant, hey, look, they're not in control over us anymore. They were weak for whatever reason. We decided we wanted to stop paying taxes. We're not going to be under their authority anymore. And we revolted and said, get out of here. We're not paying you anymore. So the Moabites had their own kings. They had their own some of their own autonomy, but they didn't want to pay the extortion to the king of Israel. That's the way things used to be. And we did the same thing. We were under the control of the Assyrians or the Babylonians. And we say, hey, we don't want to pay that. We're not going to pay them anymore. We're going to kick off this authority. We're going to stop paying. And if they want to come in and they want to go to war against us and get it from us, then so be it. But they probably have their hands full. And then we did that all the time. I mean, to some extent, the Romans, when the Roman revolt started in 66, the reason that the Judeans, the reason why the people who lived in Israel, our people who lived in Israel 2,000 years ago, decided they didn't want to be under Roman authority anymore, was because the Romans were going through a civil war. There was what they call the year of the four emperors. Rome was in complete crisis, and the Judeans said, you know what? This is a really good time for us to say we're not paying the Romans anymore for their authority. We're going to kick them out. We're not a Roman territory anymore. The calculation was the Romans have their hands full. They're not going to do anything about it. Well, turned out they did something about it, and the guy that did it was Vespasian, who becomes the next emperor. So people make those calculations all the time when they're under the authority of someone else. They say, look, when the people who are in charge of us are in disarray, that's the time to do that. By the way, one of the reasons why October 7th happened, my friends, is because the Palestinians Hamas calculated that Israel was in its closest moment to civil war during the past 2 years, in 22 and 23. Israel was in a crisis, a complete crisis. There were open protests, major protests, with hundreds of thousands of people on the streets in Tel Aviv protesting Netanyahu. Hamas calculated that this is a good time to attack. Israel doesn't have the wherewithal to go to war and to protect itself. It was a miscalculation.
I agree, but I haven't read anything that anybody else agrees with me. Did you?
No, it's there. It's there. It's Gail. It's mainly talked about in Israel because most Americans don't really care. Most of us don't care why it happened. In the end, at the end of the day, we just want to know either it's going to get fixed or Israel deserved it, right? So let's be honest. When it comes down to it, that's where most Americans, that's why you don't talk about it. But in Israel, they do talk about it. They do know that one of the reasons why Israel was attacked was because it was perceived weakness. We know about it. Hamas wrote about it. It's been talked about. Iran talked about it. It was all calculated. And it was a complete miscalculation because, again, the idea that Israel is going to go away is they believe that lie. I mean, the fact is the Palestinians believe that Israel will go somewhere else, that the Jews will leave and go back to Europe, go back to America, go back to wherever they came from, and it's not there. Okay, so they believe that lie. They believe that lie. Will Jews survive if Israel is destroyed? Yes. Will they willingly give up Israel? No. Because the idea that again, we have anywhere else that we really feel safe other than our homeland, even a homeland that's constantly attacked, is not going away. And they learned it in a very hard way because they unified Israel in a way that Israel hasn't been unified to some extent for a very long time. So yes, there are still big political divisions. There are still protests going on right now against Netanyahu. At the same time, Israel is completely unified in this war. There's only a question now.
Still haven't done
90% of Israelis are in favor of continuing the war with Hamas until Hamas is completely destroyed. 90%.
See, I don't hear
90%.
that in the American news. I don't hear that in the Israeli Times. I read it. I never heard that.
The only difference in Israel right now is whether the war should be prosecuted during the time where the hostages are being held or whether they have to wait for the hostages to come home. Yeah. About 30% of Israel's, maybe it's 35 now, it depends, it changes. Maybe 35% of Israelis want Israel to utterly destroy Hamas. If they can liberate hostages as they're conducting the war, great. If not, these people have already been martyred. 60% of probably the Israeli population wants to wait until every one of the hostages can be released through any means necessary and then bomb the whole thing. So of those 60%, probably another 50% say, yes, let every prisoner who's being held go and then blow up the whole thing anyways. You want to know that that's where many Israelis feel should happen. Let them go. Let any of the people leave an Israeli prison and go in a hostage exchange of 10,000 for 25 hostages. Let them all go. And once they're all back, blow up the whole thing.
That's why you won't see the hostages released.
We don't know, John. I mean, we don't know. But
Hey,
I'm just telling you what
it's a survival tactic.
I'm just telling
the
you
law of war.
I'm just telling you what Israelis believe. Those are what the polls say right now. So the polls are show complete unity almost on Israel's side that they want this prosecuted to the final end.
So this is one of the reasons they've held back the investigation of the military and what went wrong on October 7th. Netanyahu doesn't want it investigated at this point.
No, that's not. They want Netanyahu held responsible for the failures of the Israeli military and Israeli intelligence right away. But maybe right away after the war is over, right? Okay.
So that's right. All in good time, like Golda Meir. Same situation. All in good time.
Listen, most of the people, that's where they feel. Look, even when Golda Meir resigned after the Yom Kippur War, the war was over when she resigned, right? The war went on for about a month. When it was over, she stepped down. She said, I take full responsibility. There's a lot of people who think Netanyahu won't do that. And it's very possible he won't do that. But in the meantime, again, there are those who argue he's letting the war continue so that he can stay in power. I don't believe that 100%. I mean, maybe in the back of his mind there's that. But there is a feeling that Israel has to somehow do everything they can. I do believe that Netanyahu and at least some of the people in his cabinet want to make sure that every possible effort is made to get these people home safely. And they know that some of them are right now still alive. And that is going to be a crushing loss if more of those people die. And some people are prepared for that, but a lot of people aren't, especially the families of those who are being held. So I want to tell you right now, folks, I don't know, again, I'm not going to draw complete parallels to what we're reading here and the way people, the way people exist. existed throughout time and especially during the biblical period. But there are some interesting parallels. And when we read the story of King David and we read the stories of kind of the last times that we had political power in the land of Israel, we kind of go back to this idea of, what are the lessons, both on a national level, but also on a family level. And one of the reasons why this story is so powerful in particular, why Ruth is so powerful, is because we recognize the importance that people who've converted, who've become part of our community. And one of the reasons why the story is read also during Shavuot is that's the time that we traditionally celebrate the role that the ger has had, the convert has had in our community and making the community stronger. And so I would argue that as the Jewish community moves forward into the next century, through this 21st century, that we're going to have to continue to find ways to have people who have made the choice to go through conversion. Again, it's less of an issue for their children, but for the people who've made those decisions. I mentioned a couple weeks ago that the first major reform position held by a convert, by somebody who has gone through conversion, the person who's now ahead of the Reformed Jewish educators is a woman who went through conversion. Those types of roles, and there's more and more rabbis that are converts in our country, which is wonderful. People who've had those stories that they can tell, and who are modern examples of people who've made that decision to enter the people of Israel. This is so important for us, and it's one of the reasons why, again, I like to have Joe Buchanan tell his story and sing his songs, is because I think those kind of voices are so important for where we're going to be in the future. I honestly believe that we have to take this moment where people can make this choice and become Jewish and can be accepted, and then not only be accepted, but take leadership roles. We have to take this opportunity to make the most of it, because for most of the last 2,000 years, folks, people could not openly convert to Judaism. In some cases, they risked their lives, and they still did it, but they risked their lives and they risked the lives of the rabbis who brought them in. So again, Stacy Rosenthal and again, we're not sure because we don't ask people, if they've converted. We're not supposed to say
but this is
person
American
converted.
Jews, right? This is not Israeli Jews. Israeli Jews have a different viewpoint.
Yeah, but there are converts in Israel who've taken on leadership roles, and interestingly, in Israel, they're also not supposed to remind people that they're a convert and saying that you have a different status. And so Israel, there are people who've gone through conversion, who've joined the people, and they're not supposed to point. I mean, there happens to be some famous ones because David Ben-Gurion's son married a woman who converted, and kind of raised some issues from the standpoint of, again, he's not a rabbi, he's not a religious leader, but one of the modern leaders of Israel. Again, people who've gone through conversion who are part of the leadership of Israeli society. So again, it's not as common in Israel because there's just not that many people, that you meet that are not Jewish. I don't, by the way, I try not to use the word non-Jew. I try to use the word Gentile, because to call someone a non-Jew is like saying what they're not. And I somebody pointed out a long time ago that to identify somebody as what they're not we don't do that normally, or it shouldn't do that. I shouldn't say that person is not a man. That person is not an American. And to say that somebody is not a Jew seems to imply that their identity is what they're not. They're not this. And so I try to use the term Gentile, but somebody who is made that decision is again, I think the strongest part of our community today, or to some extent, are those people who've made the choice, who've emboldened our people and have given it new life and new direction, new energy, including my stepmother. So my brothers, my younger half brothers, are essentially, like the sons of Boaz, if you will. I don't know if they're going to inherit the family business, but they definitely have full rights within our family. That's for sure. But and I love them a lot. But it's an interesting thing that these stories, I think, do provide us a lesson on at least the most important things, which are to make sure that our community still has amazing people like Ruth. And for those people who are out there, even right now, who are like Ruth, and you know who you are, we're very proud of you, and we're lucky. We're strengthened by you. So just so you know, there are some Ruths among this group right now.
Mark,
Yes.
what about the political challenges of Orthodox conversion versus non-Orthodox conversion?
Well, that's an issue in Israel, right?
Or is that too big an issue for 11 o'clock?
No, it's an issue in Israel. It's not an issue here, right? The issue here is not, it's only an issue in the land of Israel. So people who have to go through an Orthodox conversion in Israel, that's unfortunate, right? It's not something that I it's a disappointment, but it's one that's more of political power in Israel. It's less of an issue of, in reality, what is important from the standpoint of like Jewish tradition and Jewish law, and what's the best answer for how Judaism gets to continue. This is a question of political power. And as long as the Orthodox rabbis in Israel have a monopoly over the power, that's going to continue. I don't know how long it's going to be, but it will be at least for another several years.
But
There will be a monopoly.
Ethiopian Jews, they had problems being accepted, and Christians in Israel are treated terrible. There's like 3% in Bethlehem and Jerusalem.
Some of them are. There is definitely a feeling in Israel that Christians, to some extent, are there to maybe try to convert us, and so there's a distrust of Christians there because they have been caught doing that, and it is being done, just so you know. I'm not saying every Christian in Israel is trying to convert people, but there are people in Israel who are trying to do conversion, openly trying to do it. It is happening. Again, that doesn't mean every Christian's doing it, but it is happening. It's not like it's not happening, is what I'm trying to tell you. Okay? So should Christians be treated poorly because of the minority or the percentage? No. But it is not without facts, and I've come across it, and Israel wanted to create a country where that wouldn't happen. Guess what? You can't do that. You can't. If you're going to have an open exchange of ideas, if you're going to have universities, if you're going to have, allow people to come into the country and visit and do those kind of things, this is going to happen. But Israel did want to create a place where Jews didn't have to worry about that. The one place in the world where Jews shouldn't have someone knocking on their doors and saying, "Have you heard the good word?" should be Israel. It's not going to happen. So you're gonna have that in Israel. And unfortunately, by the way, there's been some more serious examples of pressure and ways that it's been done, and I don't like it. By the way, show you real quick. This is the story about Stacy Rosenthal. This just came out. I think a couple of magazines and different places profiled her, but there she is. This is the Association of Reformed Jewish Educators. So this is a great story, and one that, again, when we call Jews by choice, what role they have to play in our world. The majority of rabbis now in Germany are actually Jews by choice. So this is what's happening in other parts of the world, and who knows what's going to happen in America.
From Germany or moved there?
No, Germans who've gone through conversion.
Who converted, who became rabbis.
Yep. Through the reform and conservative movements there. There's now 2 seminaries there, and actually one of the seminaries was run by a Jew by choice. He did not have he had an ignominious end to his reign, but he was basically the main rabbi in control of Jewish life in Germany, at least progressive Jewish life, and it turned out he was not doing good things in the background with that power. But anyways, it is an interesting story, and it's one that we don't hear about because we're obviously very focused on what happens in America and in Israel, but there's Jewish life other places. All right, folks, I want to wish you all a happy Passover, as this in Pesach, a sweet Passover. Some of you will see at our Passover community Passover Seder, but wherever you're going to be for Passover, we hope it's filled with lots of good vibes and good feelings. There's a article that I wrote in the Signal that'll be out on Saturday for Passover. We'll put that up, which is, I hope, fully a lesson for other people too, which is that there's a good message for today's world and Passover as well, or at least the Passover Seder, the tradition of bringing together people from different generations, different parts of our family and friends around a Seder table and asking questions and being open to have discussions, being open to hearing other sides. And more importantly, if we can't gather as a family to live, how can we expect there to be harmony anywhere else? The Haftarah that we read this week coming up, which is the words of Malachi, right? You read them. We read them together. That when Elijah comes, he's going to turn the hearts of the parents to their children and children to their parents. Because otherwise, we're doomed. We'd be doomed, as they say. All right, everybody. Hag Sameach. And again, thank you, Rosemary.
Hag Sameach, everybody.
Take care. Bye-bye.